So, nice to be back as always. You guys, you really should think about letting the speakers go first because it's a hard acts to follow, you know? Sit there scribbling, oh God, I don't know. So. Anyway, it's nice to be here in a constitutional county after spending so much time in Grand Rapids, where it's a free-for-all, you know? So, okay, good. So, I've got one moment too, maybe, we'll see. I don't want to steal any thunder, sorry. I got a 15-year-old who's becoming a singer-songwriter, like every other 15-year-old. But the powers that be at C3 have agreed to indulge us, and so I'm coming back out to speak on the sacred and profane July 16th, and Sonia, my 15-year-old, is in charge of the music that day. So, hey, yeah. She would hate this so much. Okay, here we go. So I understand your new theme, officially to be rolled out later this month, is We Have Questions. And that tagline, speaking of billboards, that tagline will be on billboards throughout the state or county. So I'm jumping the gun on that particular theme today, but when I asked, look, do you mind if I kind of get a head start on that? Again, the powers that be said, look, DeWilde, you pretty much do and say whatever you want when you come out, so, you know, like, whatever, you know. Sometimes it's helpful to be seen as who you are, and sometimes less so. All right, so I'm supposing that you're contrasting yourselves with this We Have Questions campaign with those institutions, places, or people, religious or otherwise, who have definitive answers and are quite sure of those answers. And those places, C3 thinks, are saying to their followers, look, you need not live in ambiguity. You need live in unresolved paradox. You need not have sleepless nights. You need not live in anxiety-provoking existential dread, alone in a hostile world, all alone, while you, C3, on the other hand, are saying, hey, maybe a little existential dread's not such a bad thing once in a while. Okay, I'm teasing a little bit, but actually it's a great thing. If you wanted to sum up my life in 3 words, We Have Questions wouldn't be a bad summary at all. And the big questions, you know, why are we here? Why is there something rather than nothing? How do we know what we think we know? Why does the city of Grand Rapids tear up every single major road artery every single summer? Why does metabolism have to slow down that much after 50? All of those questions reward, of course, honest inquiry and scrutiny, and the courage to take them on cultivates intellectual humility, which is then, from my point of view at least, the cornerstone of wisdom itself. Saith not just me, but most of the traditions that are worth studying, I think. All right, and so my question today is a perennial one: can ethics be taught? And I say this is somebody who's pointed out to me in the pre-talk, don't you teach ethics? Yeah, like for 30 years. But I get that question maybe more often than you would think. And so I did what any self-respecting ethics professor would do. I went to ChatGPT, said, look, you know, can ethics be taught? And it came back and said, well, yeah, but apparently not to you, since here you are, you know. So, no, I didn't actually use it, but it is the big question going forward. How are those of us in higher education and elementary and secondary education actually going to integrate it? Is it going to be like a calculator, or is it going to be the end of the world as we know it, like so many other things? All right, so I'll get some of the obvious things out of the way when people ask me, oh, you know, can ethics really be taught? And oftentimes, not here, thankfully, but when I give regional talks, hasn't happened so much recently, but it was for about a 10-year stretch, it was happening that I think it was some kind of church or organization. They were sending an emissary out to keep track of me. And at the end of every talk, no matter what it was, this person, usually it was a type, it was kind of a balding middle-aged guy in like bad clothes, who would stand up and say, don't you think ethics and morality is impossible without God? No matter what the talk was on, I could talk about anything, you know. So anyway, in various forms, I've gotten that question over the years, and I don't think they mean to call my entire career into existence. These people do, but not everybody. I think what they mean is, one, isn't it kind of a fool's game or fool's errand? At least by the time you get to college, don't people pretty much have their morals or their ethical compass set? What could you possibly offer them? So part of it is good faith, you know, well-intentioned, this is a waste of time, you know, it's already settled. The other part of it, of course, is dread and fear that, oh my God, maybe you can teach them something about ethics, and that's going to upset the whole apple cart. And I can give you 100 stories in which that actually proves to be true. The critics do have some legitimate fears there that what we're doing in the university is not so much promoting ideology. I do not like those professors or classes that, you know, you must agree with me or this is the right way to think. But as Beth said, the opening, you know, of hearts and minds, different ways of looking at things, different perspectives, does upset people in the ways that, you know, being liberated is upsetting to both the liberated and those who are being left behind. And so this is probably at least 15 years ago. I was a young woman in an undergraduate class who was really paying attention carefully, which I don't always get. But I could tell she was really, she didn't talk much, but she was really honed in. And probably around the 6th week or so, she just came up to me and asked me if we could talk offline here for a minute or two. And we weren't even talking specifically about the ethics of homosexuality and, you know, the rise of the LGBTQ community, which is really becoming, you know, much more in the forefront right around that time. But her fear to me was that she had come to the conclusion that her entire family and her parents were wrong in their homophobia, and she didn't know how to make the choice between what she felt was being true to herself, her acceptance and her love for and care for people she knew along with herself, and an ethical compass that steered her in a way that was much more open and understanding, and leaving her family behind, right? Excuse me. And so many, many tears. And one of the things that struck me about that is how difficult is that people accuse folks like me or the university at large these days, you know, well, you're pressing these ideologies and you're upending and you're causing so much pain and suffering for us, right? The parents or the extended family who are sending our kids to school. Like, what about your kids who are, in fact, finding their people, finding their community? They're not changing. They're coming into a community or a set of ideas or a way of living that resonates with who they, in fact, feel themselves to be, right? We just don't have that kind of power. Right? People, we got 15 weeks with them. People find themselves in the ideas, the material, a particularly empathetic professor, perhaps, but we don't change them. What we do is allow them to discover what sort of inklings, feelings, intuitions they might have that actually have, there's a tradition there that they can slot themselves into and identify with. And so looking at it from both sides, I think, is critical. But it brings me to what I want to talk about today, which is, can ethics be taught? The short answer is yes, but I'm going to complicate it by saying the three, of course, you know, the history of moral philosophy can be taught. But if you really want it to be affective in any sense, in any real sense, there are three virtues, I think, that you've got to press on as an ethics teacher or professor. One is curiosity, intellectual curiosity. One is humility. And the third and probably most important one is empathy. And so that makes it even worse, because people say, well, you know, can ethics be taught? Yes or no? Should it be taught? Yes or no? Man, you're saying that in a classroom you can help inculcate or develop curiosity, humility, and empathy? I'll say, well, if we're not doing that, you probably shouldn't pay us. And it's amazing to me, actually, that, you know, I've made a living for 30 years, asking open-ended, unresolvable questions to young people, and they just let me keep doing it. It's just great. It's sort of amazing. I go home, I go, you wouldn't believe what they let me do today. So it's really great. But those are hard things to cultivate. Curiosity is on the wane, especially intellectual curiosity. There are a number of reasons given for that. Social media, one, the whole world's, and the narcissism that inculcates, I'm my own world, I answer all my own questions. The rise of anxiety and mental illnesses, one kind or another, depression, which you lose affect and just end up with less interest in the world and yourself. And then the other one is perennial. It's forever been with us, and that is just the studied indifference of people who feel like they have to be studying. It's just hard to overcome that. Humility. If I'm honest with myself, what are my real limits? What do I know that I don't know? What don't I know but I don't know? Who's around me to help point that out? Who do I surround myself with? Who do I read? What do I read? Et cetera. And then empathy, and if you don't have empathy, there's no point in talking about ethics and morality at all. If I truly don't care how any of what I do affects you, your behavior, any violence, anything that might be, redound to you as an effect, that, without empathy, Franz DeWilde, so many other, the primatologists, the folks who look at this from a more evolutionary point of view, how do we get to it? So look, without socially cohesive groups helping out one another, you don't get the survival of our species. And the only way you get that kind of cooperation is through us understanding, at least to some degree, what it might be like to be in other people's shoes. Hence, one of the reasons I included the Simone Weil quote. So rather than just talk about this, I'm going to give you a demonstration because people say, well, how do you do that? How in the world would you cultivate this kind of thing? So I'll give you two, hopefully relatively quick examples. First one, I used to teach sexual harassment like the following. You're in the classroom, right? And we'd go over the sort of the normal stuff. It's quid pro quo. It's hostile work environment. All the sort of definitions. Thank you very much, Professor Rod. That's really helpful. Yeah. Okay, now we're going to demonstrate it. And I'd pick out some hapless, unsuspecting woman and volunteer her to be sexually harassed. And I would say, with your permission, I'm going to sort of up the ante, and I'm going to start by making, remarks that could be interpreted in different ways, and I'm going to get to a point, and you all stop me when you think I've crossed the line, and this is truly sexual harassment. And I'm thinking, oh, good, the women will have a chance to talk about sexual harassment, and the men will have a chance to, see what it's like, and weigh in. And what was happening, of course, was that the women were thinking, oh my God, it's like, really, I don't have enough of this in my life? You've got to be kidding me. And the men are like, he's not talking about me, so I'm just going to check out here. So I got invited to Consumers Energy over there in Jackson through a long chain of events to give a talk. And one of the things they wanted us to talk about, in fact, was the sexual harassment and how to deal with it. And in the middle of doing my usual shtick, I thought to myself, I had a little lightning bolt moment. And I thought, you know what? I'll sexually harass a man instead of a woman. Brilliant. I'll get beaten up and learn something. So, perfect. So I picked out this guy, and I started doing shtick, and I really came out pretty strong. I said, I happen to notice you, and, there's something about you that just sort of stands out to me. I think we should go have lunch and just see what could happen here. And I just started making more and more, and they got pretty high-level, inappropriate comments. And he was a good sport about it, but he was clearly very, very uncomfortable, right? And I didn't know what was going to happen. Where does this go? Right? So I finally end it. He sits back down. And a couple of people, thank God, they said, look, could we just have a minute to talk about that? I said, sure, ask me anything. He said, not you, idiot. He said, amongst ourselves. And what happened, which was amazing, and it's been replicated, so this is my own little experiment that's been going on now, is that the men got curious. The men turned to the women in the crowd and said, is that what it's like? I felt embarrassed, I felt humiliated, I felt singled out inappropriately, I felt powerless, I felt a whole bunch of stuff. Is that what it's like for you? And they had a conversation among themselves for a while, right? And the men got a little humble. Oh my God, I presupposed this, or I thought this, I had these conceived notions of what this would be like. I had no idea, right? And then from that, at least for a little while, some increased expressed empathy. I'm really sorry that you have to go through this. Maybe we should say more things. Maybe so that's kind of how it works. So I not only have used that at Grand Valley, both at the graduate and undergraduate level, but I wrote it up in an article for our in-house magazine. The Grand Valley Communications Machine took it and ran with it. They wanted other people to know about it. And the headline was, Grand Valley professor thinks the best way to teach harassment is to harass people. So the next call I got was from the Grand Valley lawyer. I said, have you actually read the article where I explain what I do? Well, no, but the title doesn't sound good. Doesn't sound promising to all, I got to say. Do you have plan B in mind? No. So I have carried on with that with a certain amount of caution and lots of contextualization. The second one, I use this one all the time, and we're writing this one up too, because I use it in my consulting work a fair bit. I'll just give you the scenario and then talk a little bit about, again, how those three things, curiosity, humility, and empathy, I think can be cultivated in putting people in what I have come to call affective education. Right? It's one thing for me to stand up here. You listen to me, well, that was mildly amusing, you go home. It's like, okay, great. So, but if we had the time and you were willing to, I'm going to do some role play, affective role play with each and every one of you so that, in the midst of your shame and humiliation and embarrassment, you're also cultivating curiosity and humility and empathy. And I'll tell you just in a second how all three of those, or six of those, work together. So here's a scenario that I was involved with as a consultant. Let's call the guy Mark. Great employee, long period of time in this company. All the supervisors think he's a terrific guy, really, stellar, the sort of guy you want to go above and beyond for, right? Terrific. So they've elevated him to a kind of foreman position. He's doing well. Except for about 6 months ago. And he did something really uncharacteristic. He just missed work for a couple of days, didn't call in, AWOL. People are, wow, this isn't like you at all. What's going on? So they did the usual management one-on-one thing. They brought him in. Anything going on? Can we help? No, I'm fine. I'll get it together. I'm really sorry. This job means a lot to me. It's really important, blah, blah, blah. Great. Okay, so I'm playing this out, right, either with a manager at a company or usually one of my MBA students, sometimes undergraduate. And I said, okay, so far so good. He's back on track. And then last week, same thing. Goes AWOL, really uncharacteristic. Finally comes back to work, but he's just out of it, where he might well be a danger to himself and others. And so you do the same thing. Bring him into your office. And said, no, you're the manager, right? So how are you going to play this? And students say a range of things. How many of you think the first thing out of their mouths is something that you would recognize as highly empathetic in this situation? Here you got a guy, a stellar employee, last 6 months, something's gone wrong, it's in your office, you don't know what it is, and you're trying to figure it out, and he finally says to you, you probably don't want to hear this. Now, in the 220 times that I've done this particular example, which I hope to get published sometime soon, 4 people have said, in the role play, the minute I say, you probably don't want to hear this, I'm Mark, I'm in character, they look at me and they say, you are absolutely right, I sure don't want to hear this. And I can't move them off it. But the other 216 try to find some way of responding to what they're hearing. What we're finding so far is about 24% of the responses are recognizably empathetic, in the sense that, oh, I'm really sorry. What happened was his wife left him. Sorry, that's an important piece. And he didn't know why. And she was gone, and that's what happened 6 months ago. He thought they'd reconciled. He thought everything was fine. But this last week, she left. Can't find her, nothing, right? So he finally says, you don't want to hear this. He said, no, we really want to, you're a really valued employee. We want to help you if we can. Blah, blah, Okay, well, I don't even know where she is. My whole life is torn apart. It's upside down. I don't know how people survive this. What in the world do I do? How do people do this? Do you have any experience with this? Oh, my God, And so that's what these poor unsuspecting, whether they're real actual managers or students, said, play this out. And what we're finding, as I alluded to, about 25% have something like a recognizably empathetic response. Really sorry to hear that. Oh, this really helps me understand, the troubles at work. I'm glad you came to me with this. How can we begin to help you? 75% have responses like, please don't bring your personal problems to work. It's really important that you get back on track. Or they pull out the Management 101 playbook, which is, okay, we need to get a plan together to make sure that, you can get back to the level that you were, right? Now, there are some people, that's not all 75%, but that falls into that. There's another percentage within that, immediately go to, do you need time off? Which sounds kind of empathetic on the face of it, but if you think about it, it's like, wow, that's a problem I really, really don't want to deal with. Would you please get the hell out of my office as quickly as possible? And their own dread and anxiety overwhelms any response they might have. The other thing they don't do, and this is where the curiosity comes in, at least part of it, is I said, well, I guess it's nice of you to suggest that they take some time off if that's what they really need. I said, do you have any idea what they're doing so far in their time off? For example, the 2 days that they missed, what do you think's going on? I don't know. Well, why don't you ask him? Well, what's happening in the time? Well, it turned out in this guy's case, the one that I worked with, though I could replicate this 100 times, well, me and Jack Daniels are having long conversations. Well, into the night. I said, would you like some time off? I think that would be the worst thing ever for me. Okay. Can we maybe find some other way to reconfigure your work for now and go about it that way, right? So that kind of curiosity, what's going on? And everybody's deathly afraid of the lawyers and risk and compliance and all that sort of thing. And they wipe the humanity right off the boards. Said, it's okay. If it's job related, it's all right. You can ask people how they're doing, how they're okay. And so when we debrief on this, there's a lot of conversation about, A, I'm dumbfounded. I just don't know what to do. B, I'm not trained to handle this even if I wanted to, What do people say? And that, again, the natural human inclination to say, oh, I'm really sorry that this is happening to you, somehow only occurs to 25% of the people. It's a pretty large sample size at this point. But I can tell you what can happen and why ethics can be taught, I think, along these lines, as risky and dangerous as it sometimes can be, especially if you get the wrong headline, is a young man who, by his own admission, this was last fall, by his own admission, this is undergraduate, from the middle of nowhere in Michigan, right? He's in his third year, just wants to get a general management degree and hopefully make his life better. And he volunteers to do this. So we work through this particular scenario, what I call the Mark scenario. And he's one of those guys where at the end, where I say, you don't want to hear this. And, oh, no, it's really important. Let us know. And I say what I say about my wife, in character, leaving me. And he says, I said, if you don't get it together, I don't know if you're going to have a future here. That's the first thing he said. And then we did the whole debriefing, how helpful was that? Is that really what you want to say to somebody, who's suffering this tremendous trauma? Worked it through, and we're working through in front of the class. So people are pretty vulnerable, pretty exposed. And you say, well, that's that kind of cruel. I said, no, I think that ups the ante and makes it real for people. You've got to get on board if you're going to sort of think of yourself as somebody who can go out there and do this kind of work. And this kid gnawed on it all semester. And you could tell he was troubled by his own response. And he kept, and this is not unusual in my experience, and he kept coming back to me and kept coming back to me. You need to write this paper. I want to write it on that scenario. Okay, well, now you need to write this final paper. I want to write it on this scenario. He said, I don't know about you. I'm getting a little tired of this scenario. But anyway, I said yes to all of that. Sure, forget the rest of it. This is really, he said, I can't believe I responded that way. That's not who I want to be. It's not how I want to be responsive to the people I end up working with or for or have people work for me. And at the end of the semester, he wrote this really sort of moving piece on how he thinks he would like to handle that situation like that moving forward. And we're thinking and feeling creatures, and any kind of purported ethics instruction that doesn't take the emotional component into consideration, both your own. If you're feeling dread and anxiety, all right, let's just start there. That's, how do people move beyond that so they can hear and attend to others? has to be a part of it. So that's where I think where the rubber hits the road in terms of, can ethics be taught? And I don't always have 20 or 25 minutes when people ask me that question, to explain why. I think it can be taught and should be taught. We're complex, we're messy, right? In that gap between how we would like to think of ourselves and how we actually are, it's sometimes helpful to have some other people come in there and test that out for us. And if you don't have an ethics professor handy, spouses, in my experience, romantic partners are pretty good for that. Children will certainly keep you remarkably humble, and curious, but only to a point, because it's like after 18 years of curiosity, it's like, I'm done being interested in you. The end point then, since we're there, for me would be, not only are the problems in life, should I move the company to Mexico, how should we think about the death penalty? All that stuff is messy and complicated, and people have lots of different points of view on those things. But we're messy. I think my own personal view is that all that stuff is just a reflection of our own internal conflicts, contradictions, right? We have a hard time sorting those out. So I'm going to keep teaching ethics for a little while longer here. Probably get into trouble for doing that. Probably continue to point out the gaps between, how I think I am and want to be seen and how I actually am. That is the cultivation of curiosity and humility. But where that gap is between where we'd like to be, Simone Weil's example of somebody who, basically dedicated her life in the service of those who were oppressed and marginalized, and then Comte Sponville's suggestion that we interrogate ourselves in the same way. Let's not call that gap sin. That seems to me where a lot of other traditions get in trouble. Let's call that gap an opportunity to cultivate curiosity, humility, and finally empathy. So, thank you.